Bill Maher, the controversial comedian and political commentator who routinely sympathizes with the right wing on niche culture war issues, yet again obliterated a both sides political issue, calling out MAGA Republicans for their double standards with respect to convictions and jury trials, as long as it favors their cult leader, convicted felon Donald Trump. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I've got a couple of clips to show you in this video. We talk about Bill Maher pretty regularly on this channel because he's an influential commentator, and unlike most liberal or progressive commentators, he has pretty frequent access to Republicans, to conservatives, to right-wing commentators like Megyn Kelly. And even though I think he hyperfixates on ridiculous niche culture war issues and he's too generous to the right wing on that score, when it comes to politics, he is quick to obliterate false equivalences propped up by the right. And what I'm about to show you is no exception, and I think he puts it very well when he describes MAGA and Republicans' hypocrisy with respect to the legal system and the justice system pertaining to Donald Trump's recent criminal convictions on 34 counts and President Biden's civilian son, Hunter Biden. Take a look.
I prefer it. Right, I agree. Okay, so, but here we have sort of an apples to apples situation here with the two trials we just had. Hunter Biden, Donald Trump. I jotted down a few of the similarities. Both fairly victimless crimes. Wouldn't have been prosecuted, both of them probably, if their name wasn't Biden and Trump. Both obviously guilty of the actual crime they were accused of. Both juries unanimous that came back very quickly. The difference is that no Democrat said, this is rigged, this is unfair, whereas Trump almost immediately said, we're going to go after the people who prosecuted me. One side, you can't both sides this. One side believes in elections and believes in jury verdicts, and one side does not.
He's 100% correct. As a matter of fact, you might make the argument that he's overly generous again to both sides, or at least with Donald Trump, when he says that only Donald Trump would be prosecuted for this crime. There's dispute by legal experts about that. Some 10,000 prosecutions happen in New York on comparable ground in terms of Donald Trump falsifying business records. But even if you take that at face value, he's trying to be as generous as possible to the right, but he refuses to indulge the false equivalence, which is that when President Biden's son was convicted, President Biden, nor any of the first family, nor prominent Democrats who are allied with the president, attacked the jury, insulted the jury, insinuated or explicitly called for violence. They didn't protest the fairness or the impartiality of the trial. I mean, you have to remember, this is the president's only living son. His first wife and his youngest daughter died in a car wreck. Beau Biden, his eldest son, died of brain cancer in 2015. So the president, his life has been marred by tragedy. And I have to imagine, I'm not a father, but I have to imagine if I saw my only living child in serious legal jeopardy, because you have to remember, there is a potential prison sentence attached to this, up to a maximum of 25 years, right? And we don't know if Hunter Biden would be sentenced to any jail time or just some of that potential jail time. We don't know. There is a Trump-appointed judge presiding over all of that, I will remind you. But there is a very real possibility that Hunter Biden could spend the rest of Joe Biden's life behind bars. And Biden, as the president, has the power to snap his fingers and make it all go away. More on that in a minute. And yet, he never attacked the system or the process at all. Now, the double standard was also highlighted recently by Abby Phillip on CNN, and she played a compilation of how Fox propagandists and other right-wing commentators and Republicans reacted to Donald Trump's criminal conviction compared to Hunter Biden, and it's really illustrative.
Moment, of course, creates the split screen of conservatives who just 12 days ago were slamming the rule of law, slamming the judge, the jury, and the verdict in Donald Trump's Manhattan trial. Some even claimed the conviction was the end of the Republicans as we know it. But tonight, they seem to be singing from a completely different tune.
This is a new era in America, and I think it goes against the ilk of who we are as Americans and our faith in the criminal justice system. In the end, this jury of ordinary people from Delaware were not intimidated by that family, and they recognized that this was a clear-cut case and that clearly no one's above the law.
This is a very political exercise, and you have to say that it accomplished what it set out to accomplish. But I would say this about Judge Noreika. I think she ran a very fair courtroom. She ran a very fair trial.
I guess we all need to shop at Banana Republic from now on? Because that's what it feels like. Yeah, a Banana Republic. For years, the Bidens have been able to escape any legal accountability for their sleazy, corrupt conduct. But today, their luck ran out. At least Hunter's did.
Power is all they love. And they're willing to do anything to cling to it. They're willing to destroy the rule of law. The Republic has been wounded by weak lawyers and talentless political bloodhounds. It gave me a little boost of confidence in the American legal system, although they still have a lot of work to do to win me back.
I believe that there was a conscious collusion of allies that came together. It's pretty obvious, with a private strategy to eliminate a common shared adversary. Hunter's going to jail, so Joe doesn't have to. And when he comes out, he'll be rewarded for his loyalty, like a made man in a Biden crime family. This is a distraction from the influence peddling and the kickbacks.
Again, just baseless conspiracy theories, by the way, that the idea that this was actually a ploy by Biden or by Biden's DOJ to sacrifice Hunter Biden temporarily in order to restore some semblance of confidence in the Department of Justice before the election. Again, it's an unfalsifiable cultish devotion to Trump. There is literally nothing that President Biden's Department of Justice could do to even remotely restore the GOP's faith in justice unless Garland were to prosecute Biden, slap him in handcuffs, and advocate for the death penalty. Something like that, maybe. What MAGA Republicans, both in office and in the media, want is a system, and they feel they're entitled to this, where Democrats are exclusively prosecuted. So people like Bob Menendez, or people like Henry Cuellar, or John Edwards, or Hunter Biden, or Joe Biden, whoever, where they are exclusively prosecuted. But Republicans can never be prosecuted. There's nothing that a Republican can do which merits prosecution, and certainly not Donald Trump. Remember, Donald Trump famously said, he prophesied this, that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. And people like Jesse Waters and Jeanine Pirro and Andy McCarthy and others, and again, certainly MAGA Republicans in office, they frequently demonstrate that cultish devotion. They would bend over backwards. If Donald Trump were to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, they would say, he was just shooting at the pavement and somebody leapt carelessly, foolishly, partisanly. It was a Democratic plan. Somebody leapt in front of his bullet. It's a complete asymmetry. They believe that they're entitled to this, and they're not entitled to this. And we should very firmly and smugly refuse to indulge in that. You're not entitled to a justice system in which you and your side are never prosecuted, but your opposition always is. And of course, they would lie and say that's exactly what's happening here. But I'll remind you, President Biden's Justice Department is prosecuting Bob Menendez, a prominent, powerful, incumbent Democrat, and Henry Cuellar, a prominent Texas Democrat congressman, during a very brutal, hotly contested election year. Remember, we face a very stiff map in the Senate. We have to defend 6 or 7 incumbent seats, and Republicans need only flip 2. Need only win 2 to win the majority. It would be in everybody's best interest, politically, if President Biden were to not prosecute Bob Menendez. But because President Biden's Justice Department doesn't really care about politics, they are continuing to prosecute Bob Menendez anyway during this election year. Same thing with Henry Cuellar. We are currently in the minority in the House. It would be to our benefit to have an incumbent, popular, congressman who doesn't face any sort of prosecution or jail time, which would take him out of office. And yet that's exactly what's happening. So clearly, President Biden's DOJ really isn't thinking about political expedience. President Biden's Department of Justice investigated President Biden. Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel immediately to investigate President Biden for classified documents. And we saw the political fallout of that. It was a Republican who was appointed to be special counsel investigating a Democratic president. He released that report, even though he said he wasn't going to bring charges because he didn't think he could make the case beyond all reasonable doubt. He also used gratuitous language to describe President Biden's mental state, which has been fodder for Republicans ever since. Merrick Garland wasn't obligated. He didn't have to appoint special counsel. He didn't have to appoint a Republican to be special counsel, but he did it anyway for the sake of due caution. We could talk about how Merrick Garland's Department of Justice has bent over backwards to avoid prosecuting Donald Trump. Like the so-called classified documents case, they negotiated privately with Trump, not in public, privately, for more than a year to get the damn documents back because they didn't want to prosecute him. They didn't want to go through that. But then they immediately turned on their own boss, President Biden, when he had classified documents. You could easily make the case that Merrick Garland has been grading Donald Trump and the Republicans on a curve in a desperate attempt to win them back over, to win back their faith. See, hey, listen, I'm harder on my team, on my boss, than I am on your team and your boss. But Republicans don't care because, again, they feel that they're entitled to a system which exclusively prosecutes and punishes the opposition and never them, no matter what they do. But they're not entitled to it. And that's why I hope if President Biden wins re-election, the first thing he does is fire Merrick Garland. I think Merrick Garland has a great judicial temperament, but he is not a prosecutor. And his willingness to bend over backwards to accommodate Republicans and be hyper harsh on his boss and his party, number one, it's irrational. Number two, it is a political consideration. He is politicizing the DOJ, just not the way that Republicans think. He's actually politicizing it against Democrats. And number three, it's all for naught. Republicans don't care because, again, they feel that they're entitled to a system which never goes after Republicans for any reason. We also talked about that recent CNN analysis, which showed that there are about as many Democrats under investigation, like former Democratic lawmakers under investigation, as Republicans. It's 8 versus 9. That's how scrupulous this DOJ is. To say nothing of the Hunter Biden thing, right? We talked about this before. So people say, haha, you don't understand. Biden was forced to prosecute his son. I want to make this so damn clear. As the president of the United States, Biden has the total constitutional authority and the power to have stopped this thing in its tracks. He doesn't report to Garland. He doesn't report to Congress. He doesn't report to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can't force the executive branch to prosecute somebody. Congress can't force the executive branch to prosecute somebody. They can make recommendations. They can make referrals to the DOJ, and the DOJ can give them the finger and say no, because that's our power. Biden allowed a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney to continue prosecuting his son. U.S. attorneys typically resign when a new president takes over because they're political appointees. And certainly the president has the power to just snap his fingers and fire them if they don't. Instead, David Weiss, the Republican who was investigating Hunter Biden under the Trump administration, was allowed to continue in his job. Biden said, no, stay. Don't resign. I'm not going to fire you. Continue to investigate my son. Then, when that man asked for special counsel privilege, which includes expanded funding and authority and independence from the Justice Department, Biden and his attorney general granted it. But even then, Biden at any time could have fired David Weiss or ordered Attorney General Merrick Garland to fire Weiss, or he could have fired Merrick Garland if Merrick Garland refused and replaced him with an acting attorney general who would. There are like 3 or 4 different ways that Biden, since January 20th, 2021, could have snapped his fingers and made all of this go away, and Congress and the Supreme Court, pardon my French, couldn't do shit about it. People say, well, what about that sweetheart deal? Number one, it wasn't a sweetheart deal. Number two, again, even then, let's just grant the premise that the DOJ was granting Hunter Biden a sweetheart deal because they did not want to prosecute the president's son. Let's just grant MAGA the premise. And they say, well, listen, that Trump-appointed judge stopped it. Again, if Biden really wanted to protect his son, he could have just ordered the DOJ to withdraw the prosecution. Do you know what a judge can do if the Department of Justice says, you know what, Judge, we're actually dropping the case. We're dropping all charges. The judge, again, pardon my French, can't do shit. A judge cannot order the Department of Justice to prosecute anybody. And then set all of that aside, the president has had the power to preemptively pardon Hunter Biden since day one. On day one, he could have snapped his fingers and pardoned Hunter Biden for any federal crime. President Ford did it with President Nixon back in the 70s, and Nixon hadn't been prosecuted. You can preemptively pardon somebody. Instead, not only did Biden not pardon his son, which again, it's non-justiciable, it's not reviewable. He doesn't need Congress's permission or the court's permission or Republicans' permission to pardon his son. It's total, absolute power. And he chose not to do it. He has the power to commute a sentence. He says he's not going to do that either. So, yeah, this conspiracy theory is utterly debunked. And yet, I will remind you that Donald Trump, when he was in office, repeatedly used power of pardon and commutation and clemency for his own political allies. None of his children were prosecuted, but Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Charles Kushner, his son-in-law's father, Jared Kushner's father, Trump made a number of corrupt but perfectly legal pardons to his political allies. And these Republicans didn't care. Fox News didn't care because it advantaged their side. Mother Jones has a long list of corrupt officials and MAGA allies and loyalists that Donald Trump pardoned. And Donald Trump has also promised to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol in his name to try to overthrow the government and make him an unelected dictator. So I'm sorry to say, folks, But there's a wild asymmetry here. And President Biden is just objectively, morally superior to Donald Trump by miles. And the Fox propaganda network and right-wing media and MAGA Republicans in and out of office, they are profound hypocrites. Because again, it comes down to a sense of entitlement. They believe that they are entitled to a justice system which only ever exclusively goes after Democrats and never goes after them, no matter what they do. But they're not entitled to it. And I hope President Biden makes that abundantly clear if he wins re-election in November. Let me know what you think in the comments.